Good afternoon. Hi, I've come to join you again. Time for a little bit of a chat. Won't be too long, but thank you very much for tuning in to hear me have some words about what's been going on. And I thought I'd talk a little bit tonight or two about writing. For those of you who are not interested in perhaps writing stories yourself, you may still be interested to hear how I went about it. And you've got to bear in mind that I went about it as somebody who had no training. And for most of my life, I had not even aspired to be a writer. So I do come from a slightly different perspective to the majority of authors out there who have learned their craft. And I admire them immensely because they're the ones that I find myself gravitating to read. But I do want to say anyway, hello, and hope you're all safe and well. Here in Victoria, yeah, we're not doing so great, are we? We're having a bit of a resurgence in the COVID-19 and about to be ostracised by all the other states in Australia. Yes, we're not wanted, we're being rejected. But I don't blame them. How can we blame them when we've got, as I say, this spike, this increase, second wave, whatever you want to call it? All I do know is that I will be going to a hairdresser as quickly as I can tomorrow, on the off chance that we find ourselves in lockdown very soon, which I suspect we might have to do. But if it's what we have to do it, folks. But that's not what I'm here for. And I've been talking, I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, how I've been talking to school children. Well, since then, I've lost count how many schools I've tuned into. I know one school alone, I've had 3 different Zoom events, meetings, chats to them as I try to cover a range of classes. But when I've been doing these talks and interacting as best I can on Zoom, trust me, I'd much rather be there with them, but we have had the chance to interact and have questions come from the students. Now, I should point out that the classes that I talk to, often they're English or their history or their creative writing classes. And they all come with different questions depending on what it is that they're studying and how writing is going to be interpreted in that particular subject. And I love some of the questions because they got me thinking. And in getting me thinking about my writing process, of course I had to go right back to Lully, to the Tattooist of Auschwitz, and how I went about writing that. I've already told you that I wrote it as a screenplay. Yeah, I did do some training to write a screenplay. Semi-formal. I went to tutorials and workshops and seminars and did a couple of online courses in how to write a screenplay. And I'll repeat, I wanted to tell Lully's story as a screenplay because to me it was such a visual story, and I saw it being played out, acted out. And of course I'd only ever studied how to write a screenplay, so yeah, well, there was a no-brainer there. But in writing his story as a screenplay and then having the privilege of working with wonderful producers and director as we tried to develop that into a product, a script that could ultimately filmed, but ultimately wasn't, I learned so much from all these other talented people and seeing how you craft a story. Now, whether you're crafting it as to be a screenplay or for the purposes of turning it into a novel, which I ultimately, of course, did, a lot of the processes are the same. You need a damn good story. Tick. You need, in the case of telling a historical story, you need to have somebody who's authentic, whose story is so grounded in them and in their experience and the life that they have lived, that you can tell it because they're actually telling you. All you end up being is the person who really, in a lot of ways, was taking the dictation. But I wasn't really taking dictation, was I? Because I wasn't writing down anything while I was with Lully. But that is how it ultimately panned out. He told a story. I listened. I wrote it down as a screenplay because the screenplay gave me structure. I could see how in writing in that format I had to have pacing. I had to have an emotional arc that was building and going up and down and changing all the time. All those elements that you also need in telling any story. And also in telling a story, being a storyteller, doing what I'm doing right now, telling a story. And for many people, they are great storytellers and they will never consider writing down all these amazing stories that they tell. They probably don't want to. They're just happy to be storytellers, and I've met many people who actually do fit into that category too. Some of them, you'd say they're really good at spinning a yarn. What does it matter what they're telling, what the story is? They're telling a story, and that's what we've all grown up on. Some of them are family stories, many of them aren't. And I'll come back to their whole family story in a little bit. But in writing Luddy's story as a screenplay and getting that line, that whole, structured script that then enabled me to adapt it. Look, I'm trying to think if I told you about sitting up on Big Bear Mountain in California. My brother and sister-in-law who live in San Diego had a house up there, and in the middle of winter, it was January, with snow, it snowed regularly. There was just me in this house alone for 4 weeks. My 2 companions were 2 squirrels. Now, I'm really, really taken by squirrels, and that's because in Australia and in New Zealand we don't have them. And so for me, they are these amazing little critters, and so I was very, very happy to befriend them. And I got to share my almonds and my cashews with them, and they subsequently were given those 2 names. What is it about us humans, and we come across an animal, be it a pet and me in the case of 2 wild squirrels, that I felt the need to give them a name and to be able to identify which was which. I just knew that one of them liked cashews more than the other, and so he got the name Cashew. The other one sought out the almonds. I digress. But I'll get back to that whole adapting from that screenplay and how I sat there and day after day for those whole 4 weeks, every day I allowed myself a break of about 2.5 hours when I would go for a walk. I didn't care what the weather was like, and it was pretty cold, but often beautiful as well. And one of the amazing things about Big Bear Mountain is that you can walk around it and just be part of the scenery, and it's full of pine trees and beautiful homes and a lake. Well, the lake's not doing too good right now because I think they've used too much of the water to create snow because, a couple of bad seasons, and it's not good for the skiers. But being there just gave me the inspiration and enabled me to have that time alone, just to myself, to be able to get right down into telling Luddy's story. I swear he was on my shoulder the whole time, and so many times I found myself talking to him, and I would write something and I would hear his voice, I would hear him in my head saying, "That's not how I told you, you write it like this." And I'd just smile and I'd turn around and there was no one there, but I knew that I hadn't written it the way Luddy had told it to me. I'd gone off and perhaps got creative when I didn't need to. I didn't need to create his story. It was there in black and white and vivid colour, all of the above. My job was to tell it. So tell it I did. And I didn't tell it very well, that first draft. I know that for a fact. It had something to do with switching from first person, second person, third person. Oh, let's just jump back to the first person again, as I had to learn that craft that anyone who has studied writing learns. Now, these have been some of the things that have come out when I've been talking to these students. and they've asked me questions along those lines of how do you write emotion? Well, there was a good question, wasn't it? That one had me floored for a little bit while I thought about it. And my only answer I could come up with in the immediate, and I've thought about it since then, and I've decided that my immediate response was my correct response. And how I wrote emotion, I said, was to actually use dialogue, have my characters talk to each other. Don't have me talking and putting words into their mouths. I knew my characters. I knew them really well. I sat for 3 years with Lully, being his friend. He had told me so much about Gita that I felt I knew what she would say. And of course he'd seen drafts of the screenplay and had totally approved the words I had put into Gita's mouth and how she would say them. And so in answering that question, how do you write emotion? Well, it was simple really. I don't write it. I let my characters say it. Say the words. And by giving them that freedom to use the words that they want to, the emotion came out in it. I think it did. I believe it did. So that was writing Lully's story. Silka's was, of course, a different story again in terms of not being able to know her. But as I've said, in writing what I learned, not only from researchers, but from people who knew her, I hope that I was able to find a voice that was satisfactory and in some ways reflected that brave young girl. But I'm just still trying to get back to the whole writing thing. And when I was asked questions by these students about the writing process, it really got me thinking a lot about, in some ways, how little I knew. And a couple of times I felt like I was a bit of a fraud, particularly when I'm talking to a creative writing class who have got 1 or 2 teachers in the room, these people who are qualified and experienced to teach these young people. And my qualifications come from just having written stories. But what was wonderful was to see the students, because I could see them, the camera was on them, and I could see that they were really engaging with what I said. Now, I absolutely got them hooked when I suggested to them the notion of writing a screenplay and pointed out that I may not be winning any friends with their teachers, but if they were ever struggling to find a way of structuring a story, that a simple exercise, well, maybe it's not simple, but it's an exercise that they could do. And several of them were nodding and saying, I'm going to do that. And for anyone else saying, well, how can I write a story? The writing of a screenplay, here's the thing. Get on the internet, find the websites in the US where you can download nearly every movie ever made in Hollywood for about the last 50 years. All those scripts are available for you to download and read. It's a quick read. You'll knock it off in an hour, maybe 2 at the most. Because they're short in terms of the written structure, and in many cases, there's not even many words on the page. And I pointed out to the students that what I learnt about writing a screenplay, to be able to keep it within the confines of what we consider to be a feature film, that 90 minutes to 120, was that 1 minute equals 1 page of writing. Yeah, give or take. And so I suggested to them, read the script of a movie you like, a genre you like, then go and watch the movie. See how it plays out. Then go back and read the script, and then you'll see where the actors, ad-libbed or did their own thing. But in reading that script and seeing the film, you will see the emotional arcs play out, and you will see how that story went from Act 1 to the final scene, and everything that you needed to tell a story was there, regardless of the genre and regardless of the input of the actors and the directors. The story was there. I asked one of the classes, I said to them, does anybody or can anybody in this class name a screenwriter. Just one. None of them could. But if I gave them the name of a recent movie, they could tell me who the actors were in it. A couple of them might have even known the director. And then I pointed out to them that there is not a movie out there, not even a documentary, that doesn't exist without the screenwriter. That's where it began. And that's the piece of the people that, well, I don't think we, the viewing public, acknowledge that role that they play. Maybe this is the sort of screenwriter in me feeling a little bit hard done by. But in terms of writing that screenplay, writing the books, of course it led me to then writing Stories of Hope. Now you're seeing behind me this banner. Yeah, it's big, isn't it? This is something which I've just shoved up for today. Don't worry, I'm not going to put it in your face every time. But we need a banner for me when I am talking at other organisations, other groups around the world. And look, it's a promotion thing. So, of course, my publishers said to me, can I get something that can promote the story? Well, here it is, folks. It's a bit on the big side. Look at the poor little things beside it. I've put some of the covers of Silke and Lully's stories behind me. I'm still not in my study or my office right now, so you have to excuse me for the weird backgrounds. I think I told you that I've damaged my knee and I've had to relocate my office onto my dining table. So this happens to be part of my dining room. But, once again, I digress. But I'm coming back to writing Stories of Hope. I've told you many times about the wonderful people who I've met and how through them I have heard their stories of hope. And the many who are now sending these stories of hope through to the website and to the publishers. And thank you to those people who have done that. You bring me such joy in reading your stories. Truly humbled, absolutely. But when it came down to writing this, I thought, well, all these people have been so brave in contacting me and sharing their stories. What kind of person would I be if I didn't share something of my own? If I didn't become just this little bit vulnerable to you and to anyone who reads these amazing stories? Well, anyone who knows me knows that I'm a pretty private person, so I don't tend to fess up very much about my private life and my past or even my hoped for future, other than to get out of my dining room one day and to be able to run with my grandchildren. But I needed to do more than that. I did need to open up a little bit and share with you some parts of my life. And just as I say, make myself that little bit vulnerable so that I'm not seen as someone who lives off other people's stories only. Now, I'm not going to tell you the whole story behind it, but one of the storylines or one of the vignettes, one of the chapters, whatever you want to call it, it is a story about my daughter and her husband, my son-in-law. And very, very painful for me to have to write it, because it was a very, very painful time that we went through. And this is very, very recent. I'm talking about within the last 12 months. And I got their permission to write it. They read it before I even submitted it to my publishers, because I needed them to agree to me telling this painful story. It's both my pain, it's their pain, I am so grateful to them for allowing me to do this, and I'm hoping that in telling this, because it talks about postnatal depression and how that, if you're not aware of it, can come up and bite you on the bum in such a way that, you want to do what I wanted to do, which was really smack myself around and get so angry with myself for being blind to something which was right in front of me. And so I share that story with you. There's a couple of others in there too they're about me and my family. I've told you about my grandfather. Well, those are all just wonderful memories, so nothing too much there. But I do reveal parts of my growing up in small town New Zealand and what it was like with other family members. And I have another family story in there too, and this one's not mine at all. But it's a story relating to one of my siblings, and it just seemed so right when I was wanting to write a chapter about listening to yourself and not letting others dictate what you should do, how you should feel, and your future for you. And I know there have been times when I've listened to others' advice and gone with it, even though I knew I shouldn't have. But I didn't have a story as wonderful, as humorous, and so telling as that of one of my brothers. And I rang him up and spoke to him about it and said, can I tell this? And we had a giggle about it, and he went, yeah, sure, why not? So I wrote it up and sent it to him and said, okay, here's your one and only chance to edit. And he wrote back and went, nah, I couldn't write it like that. Your way of telling it is how I saw it, but also how it in fact went down. So I hope you will enjoy reading Ian's story. So I'm talking about writing. I'm talking about being vulnerable. Hey, we're all pretty vulnerable right now, aren't we? We don't know when we're next going to be able to meet face to face. I know that the story that follows, Stories Hope, I want to travel more to be able to spend time with the ladies whose story it is. But that kind of comes down to you and me and everybody else doing the right thing right now and staying safe and staying at home, only going out when you have to. One of the good things that I heard on our local news here in Australia was this is the flu season. Okay, you would think this is the flu season here in Australia for us. And in the flu, not talking about COVID-19, but in the general influenza flu that we would have in Australia at this time of year, there's a 99% reduction in the number of cases compared to this time last year. 99%. And that's because we are all staying at home, because not only COVID-19 gets spread by being out in public, but just the general flu too. And so, I guess that's my plea to you. Please, can we all do the right thing? I want to come back. I want to get out there. I need to come and visit you in whatever country you're in. And I had such plans to be doing that right now and repeating it all at the end of the year. So please do the right thing. And I'm going to hopefully get Stories of Hope to the printers in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Part of what I've been doing in the last week is signing my name to 6,000 pages. That's what was sent to me from London to sign, to be inserted or dropped in, as they say, into books when they go to the printers in a couple of weeks' time. Well, if any of my publishers in London are listening, I've got about 1/4 of a box, which I estimate I should wrap up tomorrow, and they will be done. Yes, my hand hurts, but small price to pay. It has been a pleasure to be able to sign those and hope that anyone who gets one and they look at it and they go, how could she have written this? Somebody else has done it. No, nobody else has done that. Those pages got sent from London to me here in Melbourne. I signed them. I did it with pleasure. And I will return them and hope that anyone who picks up one of those books will know, yeah, that's her scrawl. If you've been able to meet me and get one of my other books signed, you'll recognize it's the same scrawl. I haven't deviated. Well, I'm going to probably wrap this up now. If I have questions have come through, I can see comments and questions there. But as I've said to you before, I don't want to interrupt talking to you to go and read them. I will now go and read them, and I will respond, and I will thank you so much. What I thought about doing next week with regard to the books behind me, I've told you before, but how about I show you some of these amazing covers that I have from many, many countries around the world. I'm going to pop a few of them up behind me and let you see just how creative and how beautiful they are as each country interprets the Tattooist of Auschwitz and Silke's journey in ways that they know their readers will respond to. They're beautiful. I love every one of them. And yes, not quite sure what we'll do with Stories of Hope, but time will tell. Thank you again. Ďakujem to my friends in Slovakia. Hello to my friends and family in the US. A big shout out to my friends in Canada. You know who you are. And of course in Israel and New Zealand, the UK, and wherever I've been able to travel and meet you and talk to you. Oh, how could I forget South Africa? Loved being there and being with the people in South Africa. I'm going to keep writing. I hope you'll tune in and we'll have another chat in a couple of weeks' time. In the meantime, good evening. Good morning. I'm not sure what the correct one is. Bye-bye.